Welcome to another edition of Working with Gen Z. Friends, we've often heard the term diversity and inclusion. And when we normally talk about DEI, we talk about gender balance, we talk about culture, we talk about many other aspects. But there's one aspect which generally comes and it sits very quietly in the room is the one that talks about the age. We're talking generally about, do we have an experienced person who is getting passed by for an opportunity, perhaps because we think he or she is not able to learn or adapt. But the issue when you think about that ageism word is also that it can cut both ways. In other words, there are probably instances where we may have a young person, a relatively inexperienced person who could also be passed up for some opportunity because simply we think that he or she is not having enough experience. Now, that is, it seems like the reality of the multi generation workforce. And we're going to try to examine some of the hard truths, what tends to happen, what could we do, more importantly. If you're in a system when you're managing someone who's 22 or perhaps 60 on two sides, what should you do? And to help us with that is just the guest, and I'm very happy this is finally happening. And I'm very happy to welcome Veejay Madhavan. Vijay, good morning and welcome to the show.
Pleasure to be here, Nikhil.
Okay, thank you, Vijay. And I know you've got some travels coming up, or you had some travels, so thank you for kind of making this happen. And let's dive in. But we're gonna before we go into the questions, you obviously have a very, very nice background that I think we love for our listeners and viewers to kind of listen first. So if you can take a couple of minutes, tell us a little bit about your own story, and then let's go into the topic.
Thanks, Nikhil, for the opportunity, and I'm happy to be here to share my thoughts and my own journey, in not only personally, but in the multi-generational space. Well, I'm currently a consultant, a non-executive independent director for a couple of companies. I also write frequently on multi-generational dynamics, including the moderating effect of AI in the workplace. My doctoral research is specifically on that. Um, uh, I'm a father, who's happily bringing up his 14-year-old who's pursuing her own aspirations, a Gen Z, in the US. But most importantly, I help a lot of organizations navigate this multi-generational context, particularly with AI amplifying uh, a lot of the critical thinking gaps as we've seen these days. And these actually have a significant impact not only in terms of productivity, but retention, succession readiness, as well as the financial implications. So, I've worked with, I came from the life insurance industry, but for the last 5 years, I've worked in almost all sectors, and it's interesting that, making the world my playground to be able to be that, what we call, uh, evangelist would be the right word, and go out and share this message and help organizations not just navigate this, but be equipped to take this on their own has been very, very rewarding and, significantly humbling.
Super, Vijay. Thank you. I think this is we're very happy to have you to share your insights because you bring just the sort of the right experience that we want to talk about on the topic today. So, Vijay, you obviously you mentioned you're a father to a young Gen Z daughter, as well as you work very extensively with Gen Z. So, we're going to talk about that and also touch upon an aspect that you mentioned, which is how AI or perhaps technology can bring some of the biases on generations. That'll be our focus. But let's start by saying when we use the word ageism, generally it's assumed that ageism is referring to the one end of the spectrum, which is to say that, okay, you've got 20, 30 years of experience, he or she's been in the system, but as things have changed, things have evolved, markets change, and technology changes, and so much and happening at such rapid speed. Ageism is referring to just the one end of the spectrum, but it is perhaps more on just on more than that one side. What have you seen? Is it just the age on the elderly side, or do you also see something coming on the other end of the spectrum?
Well, Nikhil, it's a great question to start with. And I believe ageism is a two-way street. And I've seen both directions up close in my course of work. Now, we are very familiar with one direction where a young person comes up with an idea and then it gets brushed off immediately, saying, oh, this is not the way it works. No request for explanation, just outright rejection. And I've seen firsthand the disappointment, heads dropping in real time. Uh, and it's not my place to judge the leaders who make those decisions. But what it does do is that idea then dies quietly, not because it was wrong, but it was never actually executed properly. And so, even if it does make past the first hurdle, often due to the lack of support and execution, it then becomes a failed idea. And then, after enough tries, young people stop bringing ideas at all. So they'll ask themselves, why take it to the dinosaurs? That's how they may perceive it. I personally have been on the receiving end of it, proposing something different for a context we were in while I was a senior manager, and just being, no, this is not how we do it. It does close people down fast, but it does run the other way too. And in my experience, having mentored more than 500 Gen Zs globally now, sometimes younger people assume that the moment they have a smartphone in their hand, they've got all the answers. And they stop asking the deeper question, like, how might we get there? What might we be missing? So, in my opinion, curiosity is the fix either direction. But it takes real courage to be curious, more than people admit. Now, there's a difference when I say curiosity, some people misread it as, do I inquire further? Now, there's a difference between investigating an idea and actually being curious about it. Now, investigating is, no, explain yourself, right? Curiosity is, that's interesting. Tell me more, right? Why do you feel that way? Uh, so most leadership teams or leaders default to investigating because we think we have bigger things to handle. And I can appreciate that in a leadership position, having been there myself. But it's the real discomfort of discussing that where a real answer and opportunity may lie. So uh, it is the difficulty, not the comfort, where you actually find the strength of an idea. And age has got nothing to do with it, as long as you're willing to sit with that discomfort. So it is a two-way street.
Yeah. No, very good point. I think you really kind of brought out two, three important aspects. One is the fact that the young person is in a meeting or walks in to say, "Yo, she's got an idea," but if we brush it off it there, it just kind of dies, right? And then like it's gonna make it very reluctant for him to come back. Second, I also like the point that because, and we all acknowledge they're much more tech savvy than perhaps some of our other generations, and but the phone or the device may not necessarily bring and have all the right answers. It may give you or lead you to a source, and I think to follow up that is the whole question of curiosity and the distinction between or curiosity versus sort of trying to just ask more questions, right?
Mm.
Um, let's just to build on that, Vijay. Where do you sense have these biases actually come about, right? In other words, I think we now are at an interesting working space or a time where we have three, perhaps four, or even maybe some can argue five generations at one time. And maybe in our career, we may have witnessed that, okay, if ageism were to happen, it is on the one extreme, which is, let's say, a elderly, inexperienced colleague. But from your perspective, like just working with so many companies, both Gen Zs and also, having worked at senior level, where do you sense do the ageism bias come about? Is it media? What's the origination?
Well, let's step back a little bit to probably my time. I'm a Gen X, right? I believe every generation has been labeled in some way. When I was growing up, the boomers used to look at us and say, "Well, you guys aren't hardworking," because they would put in the long hours. We did too. Just that we drew the line in the sand, saying that, look, Fridays we work 4 days, really. no matter what. I've gone home at 11 o'clock when the building was being shut down. But on Friday is 5 p.m. Out the door. This is my life. This is my weekend. It's the happy hours, right? It's our social time. Uh, so we drew a line in the sand. Then the millennials came in. They wanted to climb the corporate ladder. They wanted balance. I'll only work 9 to 5. After 5 is my time, right? And we started calling them less hardworking. And now we've got the Zoomers in the mix, and then we have new labels: soft, entitled, less resilient, strawberry generation. First sign of hardship, they bail. But here's where I think the truth actually lies, and that is context. And allow me to sort of elaborate further. Now, my generation, we grounded out, and we saw firsthand, very openly, opportunities going to, blue-eyed boys, favoritism at its peak. And obviously, you had to work very hard to earn your place. So when we had kids, we wanted to make sure they didn't have to face it. We gave them more broader education. We wanted them to have opportunities that we did not have. But along the way, we also created those soft landings and safety nets, right? Because we appreciated the pain and we didn't want them to feel that. We felt, get them to think forward rather than worry about falling down. But here's the blind side. The blind side was we did not prepare them for the harsh realities of the workplace, because the workplace technically has not evolved. If you think about it, it's the same hierarchy. It is the same job descriptions. It is the same pecking order. So we did our best to give them a manual for calmer skies. But it turns out there's more turbulence now than we ever flew through. So they weren't ready for that. And then they look at us and then they call us dinosaurs, out of date, obsolete. This is an old idea, right? I'll give you a personal anecdote here. This also came from, again, mentoring some of my Gen Zs. I was once called a granddad when they first saw me. Yep, I don't take this personally. And this was something about me talking about AI, and they looked at this guy and said, "What does this old guy know about AI?" But when I showed them, I knew a lot about how AI should be ethically and responsibly used, and some of the pitfalls, including how they were using AI and how the proper use was. All of a sudden, I was called the dude. It was no more the granddad. So I just elevated my stand, right? So my question to them is, my statement to them is, stop calling me old if I can do what you can do. And I'll stop assuming you're entitled the moment you ask me a hard question. So most of the biases and stereotypes we see do carry a grain of truth from a specific moment, but then they calcify into something the whole generation gets stuck wearing. So it's always context which I attribute, these biases that emerge, because there will be a different context in India, there'll be a different context in Europe, there'll be a different context in the US, and also even the Middle East, right? Having worked in these continents, I've seen that.
Yeah.
Firsthand.
Yeah. No, it is very, very contextual. And I guess that brings up to the question then, in your experience, again, what do you see? What do you believe? What are you sensing that perhaps, what is the stereotype that each generation is carrying about each other, right? We kind of read about it, we joke about it, and mention your own story, which, by the way, is good. Then, and you said that, hey, yeah, they kind of changed their view based on what you did. But what, in your view, is some of the biases, do you feel that maybe we carry, as I'm not speaking as a Gen Xer, that maybe of other generations, so from the bosses to the subordinates. So I'd like you to kind of think about maybe from the Gen Z on one end and maybe one or two of the generation on the other end. What are some of the biases
So,
you feel that
I mean, I've had a lot of exposure with Gen Zs, right? And I've spoken with a lot of leaders. I do some work with a leadership, sort of, we are a peer group in Indonesia. It's called Executive Global Network. And, we've had conversations around this. And there is this thing where they say, oh, it's so difficult to keep them. They want more in their offers. They expect a lot more. And that, frankly, alludes to the point that we've created the safety net. So hence, they come with that anticipation um, that, they're not, they're not the ones that come in. They don't follow the routine 8 to 5. They like to get up when they want. They've always you don't see them at the tables. They're always at the water cooler, talking about this. They're on their phone all the time, which happens to be, in Maslow's. So we call them disconnected everything. But at the same time, we're also not willing to appreciate the fact that do they get the work done? If they've got the work done, then the journey has been, the destination has been achieved. Why are we so obsessed with the journey, right? This is some of the experiments I used to do in some of these multi-generational workshops. I would say, well, we're in Singapore, we're off to go to Bali, right? So your destination is Bali, your origin is Singapore. So how many ways can you get there? You can fly, you can ride, you can drive. So it's not the journey in itself, is whether you get to the destination. And this is something that leaders need to accept. There is no one way to get to a certain place. I, for example, when I was CEO of the Lao business, we were the first business that went from a 5-day to 4.5-day week. And Fridays were training days because it was a nascent industry, so we spent a lot of time on training. But we allowed our team to work from anywhere. But here's the caveat. The caveat was the work needs to be delivered. And these are privileges, not entitlements. See, I qualified it. Hence, if we do not deliver the work, then these privileges will be rescinded. So you see, the fear of loss is always psychologically more powerful than the joy of gain. And actually, you got the younger people to work together, try and find some fixes, work with their older peers. And even the older peers that realize, wait, these boys and girls can work really fast because they can do it. Just allow them the time. And I would only say that, we had morning sprints and afternoon, evening sprints that we had meetings. Just make sure you turn up for those. You're on the call and you report your part. And actually, we moved a lot of things forward. So we also have to sort of let go of that. There is no one way of doing something. But again, for 50 years, all of us have been educated on the word process. And so we are so obsessed with process, but actually it's the outcome, right? With AI now taking over a lot of tasks in the process, we should equally shift. Yeah. And there's a second part to it that, it's very easy to misread the room. And I'll give you a personal, it just happened recently. I was actually speaking to a bunch of Japanese Gen Z students, about just over a month and a half ago. And this room was exceptionally quiet. And I mean, I've seen all sorts of Gen Zs, but this room was really quiet. And I was wondering, did I lose them? And the silence was more deafening than anything else. But the professor then told me, Vijay, after your session was over, and these boys and girls went off for a dinner break, they were only talking about your clarity atom and how to get to that happy place. So while they were quiet for a moment, I misread silence as disconnected rather than silence as a form of listening. So it was one of my own principles which I overlooked at the time. So being consciously aware is another thing about this, right? Because we are naturally we sort of defer back to bias or safe zones when we are unsure. So that's where I come from.
Vijay, I think some very good examples, and especially because this podcast also, I mean, I think it really is also there to help the managers who are thinking about Gen Zs, and you're talking about, I really right the example of the destination versus the journey, right?
Yeah.
Perhaps some of our own thinking was molded in a way that, hey, look, how can you leave if it's not 5 p.m. or how can you leave
Yeah.
before 6 p.m. because you still haven't done the time. And I think that whole equation is really getting relooked. What about the Gen Z thinking from just if since you work, how do you see there's some of the biases that they may carry about, let's say, their bosses? So it could be Gen Ys and the X's and even the boomers. So, what are some of the biases? Like, and I think you gave your own example about like, look, AI is an open system, open tool, right? Like everybody can learn it, right? And so just curious to see that, okay, what have you seen some of the biases that they carry about the other generations?
Yeah, they feel that, I mean, there's a lot happening, right, Nikhil, in the world, and they're observing everything quietly. And what I found is that they, in one of my research, they actually have just lost a little bit of trust in leadership, right? Because we're very good at coming up with collective missions, collective vision, collective this, collective that. But in the real workplace, we measure everybody as individuals. We don't look at people, we don't look at teams and measure them as one collective unit. That is something that we've we say we do, but we often not doing that. So they feel that, we've slowly eroded our credibility. So they look at us and they say, they're skeptical with half the things. And so the things that I've sort of picked this up as early as 2017 when I hired my first batch of Cambodian Gen Zs. They were smart. They were not we put them through very rigorous selection. So they were not like the top of their academic grades, but they were really capable. And I've heard them ask, so how would you do this? Because generally the leader would say, yeah, go get this done. And so how would you do this? And then the leader would say, you go ask this guy, you go and ask that guy, you go and ask that guy. But what they're asking us is, you show me how you do it. So I picked this up very quickly and I wanted them to experience firsthand. So I had these five kids. And I used to travel across the country once a month on a road show, meeting all my staff in the provinces. So 1,200-kilometer road trip because I have a number of provinces. So I would pick one of these guys and girls to accompany me for the whole trip. And we would be talking in the car, they see me stopping by at the local cafes, being curious about the culture in the country I was still adapting to, getting them to translate, then doing the town halls. And after town hall, we debrief. And after debrief, we'll get to bed. And then we start off the next morning. And in the car, I'm still not asleep. I'm still scribbling notes, thinking, having conversations with them. And after 1,200 kilometers and the 4 days, I told them, this is what work ethics is like. It may not be your form, but you ask me how I did it, this is how I do it. Now, you find your own way. You may be smarter and you may be a lot more innovative, but this is how it's done. Because it's not about picking up the phone. It is about going there, having those conversations, but not just seeing the travel as a break, but continuously finding ways to improve. So what they don't see is they've only seen only the tip of the iceberg. So they carry that bias that what we've done 50 years ago is outdated. But there are certain elements in, the foundational elements have not changed. Context hasn't changed. Hard work, whether it's cognitive or physical, that hasn't changed. So by educating them, I asked them, so how did you feel from that experience? And they then realize, oh, this is how things need to be done, right? So you figure out your own way, but you have to put in the hours and the shift in some shape or form, whether you do it from home or a cafe or use AI or use technology. A shift needs to go in and the shift needs to be regular. It needs to be repeatable. It needs to be something that builds up. So they have this thing that we talk a lot of rhetoric, but our methods are outdated. And so sometimes you have to lead from the front. And then once you've done that, you step back and you guide from the rear, because right now they have now formed, all right, this is how I get to my destination.
No, very good point. I like it. I think just the context of the world in which they've grown up, right? From Black Lives Matter to the fake news and to the wars and the climate crisis, I think the general trust seems to be evaporated, right? But I
Yeah.
think for them to see good leadership, we have to demonstrate good leadership. And I think the story that you mentioned is a good example of how, like, let them see it firsthand that, okay, if I'm hands on, like, I can see it, what my boss wants, what my boss means.
Mm.
In your view, Vijay, what do you sense that the Gen Z generation, is it overvalued to their strengths, or is it undervalued to their sort of
Mm.
potential? Because so we hear the two ends of the spectrum, right? Where people say that, okay, yeah, they're very tech savvy. Obviously, that's a common denominator of Gen Zs across the globe. But do you sense that, as we, heard the stereotypes, the strawberry generation, they're fragile, this, that, the other. What is your view? I mean, again, it's very contextual, but what is your view?
Yeah.
Is it, do we, have we overvalued or undervalued that generation? And just from your perspective.
Well, Nikhil, honestly, there isn't a one clean answer to
Yeah.
this, right? Workplaces say they want youth, they want diversity, inclusion. That's the pitch. We have DEI. That's a pitch. But having, I've been a independent board director. I've been on advisory boards, and from our end, we actually haven't rewired ourselves to actually deliver that. So there's always a domino effect from the top. So you see it in the hiring, right? Someone gets picked because of a strong GPA or scores, but zero real experience. They can draft a process beautifully done, right? It looks well thought through, but then it never had to execute one under pressure. And then you have on the flip side someone who's got real ideas, enthusiasm, not the great credentials to match it. And then nobody knows how to channel that great energy into the right direction. So I've said this in my TED talk last year, right? That the Gen Zs are brilliant at taking off, but terrible at landing. And that's because we are all just too busy firefighting to teach them how. Now, there's a very interesting data point that just came out a couple of weeks ago from Deloitte. I believe it's their 2026 Gen Z and Millennial survey. 76% of Gen Zs want to reach senior leadership eventually. But only 6% say it's your primary goal right now. There's a little bit of a shift compared to the Gen Zs I dealt with about 6, 7 years ago, who all wanted to quickly climb up the corporate ladder. Their goal was, I want to get a VP fast, because they've only seen that glitz and glamour of a vice president cutting ribbons, giving out trophies, giving speeches, so they think that's our primary job. Little do they know all the split-second decisions that we have to make. And then they actually are not disengaged, but they've this, like you said, they now know the real cost of leadership, the stress we go through, the burnouts. And at this stage in life, they said, maybe not worth it yet. So they've also begun to realize it's okay to kick the can down the road. Let me do things I want to do, right? Because they have a lot of aspirations. It's not just a career. They're looking at lifestyle. They're looking at homes. They know the cost of getting a home is now also just aspirational. It's just become more expensive. And the AI rhetoric does not help. We've now the narrative has been AI replaces jobs, AI can do this, AI can do that. We've oversaw what AI can do, but never spoken very openly about what AI cannot do. If you look at it on social media, right? Everybody is selling all the softwares. It can do all this way. This is the right solution, but it doesn't tell you exactly what they cannot do. And so the companies, have not prepared their people to develop those cognitive and critical thinking, to take control of AI and make that work so they can uplift the entire organization and the stakeholders, right? So that credibility now is missing in the leadership, because leadership is now saying, oh, we all talk the same AI story because everybody's on the bandwagon, right? But if you ask me, you know, how many leaders do actually stand up in front of a tunnel and said, all right, people, we got this one wrong as a leadership team. And to be honest, Nikhil, my leadership team and I, we did this back in 2021, 2022, where we ran something, and then we all realized, God, we were blindsided by this. And, it was our teams that were going to do that. Now, we actually stood up there as a leadership team, and I apologized to the team saying that, guys, we didn't see this one. So we all have to work, but we'll make sure that the business as usual continues, and we give you all the support possible so that we can get this sort of rectified. But that won us more respect because we told people that we didn't have all the answers, and we were as vulnerable as anybody else, but we were open to be accountable for it. That sends a very different signal, because in the past, the perception is the leaders have all the answers and they can never do me wrong, right? So young talent is looking for accountability, not perfection these days, and that's why they're also kicking the can down the road to becoming leaders. And they're also watching us very closely, and they have their own little chat groups where they're exchanging things about us as a leader.
Such an important point. I hope that all the managers listening to the podcast can you, because I do believe that it's just the shadow that we have to watch and be careful. I also really like what you said, Vijay, which is that the whole world talks about AI, but let's also bring to the Gen Z and the foray that heck what the AI can't do. And I think that's there lies the opportunity for them to be curious, to be upscaling themselves and kind of, get their hands dirty. Vijay, if you're a manager trying to lead a team which has colleagues from two ends of the spectrum. So if you've got a colleague which is 22, 23 versus someone who's in their late 50s or 60, what are the things that we should be careful, or what should we avoid as a true multi-gen team with colleagues at two ends of the extreme?
Well, there's only one advice I will give them, right? There's only one thing, and this is something that 99% of companies don't do. Whether it be a project team, a section, a department, right? You must treat your team as a collective unit first before you treat them as a collection of individuals. You see, that's something that leaders need to set. Right? We spend a lot of energy, they say, mission statements, language, values, decks. And then when it comes to measuring performance, it's me, myself, I. That's backwards, in my humble opinion. You got to measure the effectiveness of the collective first. And then you go to the individuals and how they've contributed to it. Right? And there you would see the real, analysis of how you develop these individuals towards their next role. So I've experienced this firsthand in team coaching, because team coaching is very different from individual coaching. Team coaching is where we sit like a fly on the wall and we observe a meeting and we see, well, where some people are straggling, some people are sitting on the fence, some people are not participating. And we, as a team coaches, we step in and we say, hey, hang on a minute. I believe everybody has not had their say. And then I will start to call up those people who have been quiet. What's your opinion? Because these are people responsible for executing the entire project. And leaders, because they've seen them as a collective of individuals, not as a collective unit, right? Struggle with this, because as a leader, your job is to remove obstacles. So all of the views are heard, and all of the, all of the execution is done seamlessly as a team. And it's not like, oh, this is my job, therefore, if it's out of my scope, I shall not volunteer to go and help someone. That should not be the case. We own this project outcome or this strategic outcome together. And if something's not working, we all step in and we help each other out. That needs to be the thinking. And that's a tone that leaders need to set, not 5 separate motivational profiles by age bracket, right? That's one advice I would give people. The second is creating the psychologically safe environment for communication to be honest. I would be critical that, we have so much focus on DEI and everything in that we're now so we have a knee-jerk reaction every time someone says something which is out of sync, right? Well, in my view, you can only call a spade a spade. You can't call a spade a manual digging tool. But how you say it's important. And here we have not trained managers enough. There's a difference between a statement of assessment, assertion, you know, declaration, offers, promises, uh, and judgments. And in no case can we make a statement that is one of judgment, because everything is in context, right? So if I'm sitting across you right now, Nikhil, I said, Nikhil, I experience you as a very open and approachable person, right? Or I experience you as someone who's quite close to ideas. You know, you that's a statement of assessment, because I say in my experience, I'm experiencing you. But what we have these days is that we don't train managers enough. We teach them communication skills, but they still pass judgments in meetings.
Yeah.
And that is obviously against the principles of DEI. In fact, but notwithstanding, no one has the authority to judge another person's character, because we don't know their own upbringing. So here's where leaders need to also improve, right? We have to create an environment where everybody is able to speak freely, but also help someone to say, well, that can be better. You can put it much better by, is this clarified, right? Do you mean this? Actually, you should say this. That makes it more safer for everyone to understand, rather than pass judgments. And I see this from older leaders. They tend to just pass judgment. I've seen a leader say, no, you don't know what you're talking about. I've seen it many times, and I'm sitting there and I says, that's a judgment statement. You might want to say, well, I differ. I have a different opinion here, from what you think. And that might be because I've had more exposure in that space. So you clarify, you then set the context, and then you give your view. But what do we do? Say, no, 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 you don't know what you're talking about, right? I'm sure, a lot of managers, as I say this, who are listening to this podcast, relate to this. But as leaders, and then that younger generation copies that from the older generation, it then becomes like a playbook
Yeah.
of allowables. That's a second mistake.
Yeah.
And the third one, the third piece of advice, so three, right? One is collective. Second is create the psychological environment for open communication. Third one is we are very excellent at writing charters, but terrible at living them. Meeting of the meeting, charter of the charter, no real depth underneath. So we write these massive charters, project charters, for the sake of governance. But the actual work is asking every day, are we living what we agreed to? Are we helping each other? Are we calling these right behaviors out? Are we amplifying the good behaviors? Are we equally amplifying the lessons that we learned? Right? Uh, we used to have a term called death by meeting. I think we have so many meetings these days that it's slowly becoming suicide by meetings. It takes a lot of preparation to do well. But what I've experienced and observed working with so many organizations is they skip that until the performance drops, and then somebody in the board starts asking the hard questions. Who's really adding value here? Or CEO is asking his leadership team, so why is this so? Who's adding value? Who's not adding value? And sometimes the line managers can't even articulate that because they've been so busy working on the charter rather than living it. Right. So three things, right? Walk your talk once you've got it. Have honest communications, make it safe. And third, when you're leading a team, your team is one unit.
Yeah.
You are part of it. Whether be it a 15-man, 20-man, even if your operations department, you are one unit, right? And that's something you have to develop. And we speak a lot about it, but we are terrible at bringing that to life.
Yeah. No, really like it. I think walk the talk, make sure it's a collective unit, and create safe space. All of that requires each member to, the leader to invest the time, and it's a journey. I think you have to build it. Two final questions here, Vijay. One is to say that we've spoken a fair bit now from just understanding the biases, where it exists, and what can one do. Let's throw for the sake of and keep it simple in general. That okay, if in if by chance you seem to experience an ageism bias or discrimination for whatever reason. Let's say you're a young person getting passed up on an opportunity because of you got a too inexperienced tag versus an old person saying, "Hey, he's past his prime, whatever." And what should the employee do more generally, and
Mm.
what's the recourse as a way to when you sense it, to kind of look at that and say that okay, maybe I think I need to be in this conversation or I need to be in this opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, it all starts again, goes back to the first word I said at the beginning is curiosity. Because everyone would make a statement or label because they lack the curiosity. You've got to be curious of why something is being said. So, and you've got to give it a shot before you make a decision. Because sometimes it is not the right leader to work for, sometimes it's not the right environment to work for. But don't use one example to say, and just blatantly think that it's the entire culture or the context. Have conversations. You're going to come back and say, well, I've got guys who come up to me and say, my own leaders, said, he used to tell me, boss, I think sometimes you're a bit too harsh when you speak because I'm very direct. I'm candid, right? And because it's in English, and I work for a British MNC, so among the English, being candid is fine. But in a country that is where English is not the first language, when it gets translated, it becomes too harsh. It becomes too condescending. So I said, well, give me an example, right? And it give me these examples. And I said, it's fair request. So how do you think I should navigate this? Because I really want to make sure the message is clear, but it needs to land in the right context, given the cultural nuance. And they will give me some help. And I said, fabulous. But if I choose to reject and say, no, I'm not going to change this because it's going to erode my authentic leadership style or communication style, it doesn't erode. I'm just adapting to my audience. Then I would have to anticipate that I will have massive resignations in a matter of time. And my reputation in the market would be one that is of condescension and harsh language. So this awareness of asking feedback from also staff and being open. So the younger people need to do the same. Actually, the Gen Zs aren't afraid to say this. They say it quietly through other mediums, in chats and in water coolers, and they say, have you seen the boss? And so the important thing is at the top we must have an open door policy, right? One of the things I did when I had a Gen Z team was I got rid of my CEO office. I did not have an office. I did not have a secretary. I said, there is, with AI and technology, why do we need a secretary? I said, what future do you have? So I got her redeployed into human resources training. She's a senior training manager now.
Yeah.
So she's built a career, not 20 years later. What are you? Still a personal assistant. So I got her in my office and I forced myself to sit with my staff in hot desking, using the same facilities. So first thing, that physically shattered all barriers. Physically shattered all barriers. It did bring some discomfort because I used to plump myself in between some of my Gen Zs and do work, and they were a little uncomfortable. But I then started joining in their conversations, and then when I knew that I was not meant to be there, I'll just step away and go somewhere else to do the work. Because as a leader, you also need to know when you exit that conversation because it is their conversation, not yours to be in. But those are the ways you actually build and develop confidence in your team. And all of a sudden, I have people who send me messages. I like to take your view on this. I have this problem. Would you like to? Would you like? I got a little busier, But at least I got busier for people and not, it's not a firefighting, not, I need your decision, which is a better thing because they would still make the decision. But they are very open at using you as a leader as a sounding board. So here's where the veteran context and the innovation of the young converge, because they have now got a level of comfort and confidence that you're equally as open to ideas. So we have to break barriers today. Uh, I think the barriers, they're actually, coming down in some places. But even if we still had the structure of your physical structure, at least from a intellectual and from a emotional structure, where I call emotional integrity, not intelligence. The same person you are at home must be the same person at the office, right? Do all of us practice that? Or do we have one role at the office and then a Jekyll at the office and a Hyde at home? Can't be the same. I think that's where you suffer burnouts as leaders.
Yeah.
They need to see you as you are. And the more you become you, the more they will become they, and they will become individuals. So,
Fabulous.
yeah, that would be the answer I would have.
Yeah. No, I really like. I think building the sense of curiosity about each other. I also really like, and it's quite humbling for an experienced manager to do this. Sometimes, maybe more in our Asian context, which is
Yeah.
the need for feedback, the reason to ask feedback, because
Mm.
generally we think that, hey, more age, more experience equals right answers, right? But then, and then, as you rightly said in the very end, that okay, can you be yourself? Because I think the more you carry yourself, I think like that, then the Gen Z or the other generation sees you more authentic.
Every generation.
Yeah.
Just one, this,
Yeah.
just one clarification there on feedback. This is worth a quick mention. I actually alluded earlier about communication, right? Assessment, assertions, declarations. And that's important when we give feedback because we are giving assessments. If we have proof points, we make assertions. If we have sufficient, we say, okay, declaring something going forward. Let's let us work together on this. We're declaring, I'm making you a promise. So assessments can be due to recency bias. So you need to be clear.
Yeah.
And this is where, feedback becomes uh, negative, as they call it, right? There is no such, in my humble opinion, feedback is always neutral. It is the way feedback is being delivered and the way feedback is then, in the manner of delivery, being received that determines whether it's positive or negative. Actually, feedback is neutral.
Yeah. Yeah.
Feedback is neutral.
No,
They
absolutely.
should have been quicker with the service.
Yeah.
It's neutral, but it's the way you say it, and that's what we have to train leaders to do more of.
Sure. No, absolutely. It's intellectually we all get it, but it is a skill, and I think we must demonstrate and perhaps also, kind of train the people in the team. One last question here, Vijay. This has been fabulous. One, just as a way to close out, what could be just maybe just one final sort of piece of advice as you think about how can we unbox our biases about each other, right? What should you do? I mean, you mentioned curiosity, you mentioned many other things just as a way to close. And this could be across the spectrum, right? So, me thinking about a Gen Z or the Gen Z trying to give a little more space to the experienced person, what to keep in mind, and just as a way to close out.
Well, I would say only one thing. Never, pick one thing. I would say, don't mistake questions for disrespect
Yeah.
as a form of disrespect. In fact, we hear this all the time from a lot of leaders and a lot of veteran contacts would say, during my day, we were doing this, we were doing like this. And someone would ask how, and then they get handed a bunch of rhetoric instead of the actual answer. So, I think a question is a form of curiosity, right? And we should not say this, why is he asking me this question? And if we don't know, it's okay to say we don't know. Let's find out together.
Yeah.
And my daughter is a classic example. When we grew up, we would never. And I remember I was growing up. I would never look at my father or mother and ask why. Why is the sky blue? When we told them the sky is blue, we say, yes, dad, yes, mom, sky is blue. We accept because we always acknowledge our parents were, gurus. And
Final word, yeah.
yeah, they were the almighty, the power stops with them. Today, when you tell the kid the sky is blue, the kid turns around and says, why is it blue? Why is it not, why is it sometimes gray? Why does it look cloudy? And you can't just pass off and give them an answer that, off the cup. Well, I don't know. Let's find out. And to be honest, in that real context, Nikhil, I actually found out a lot about the atmosphere and about clouds because my daughter asked me why. And I said, darling, I don't know, but let's find out together. And we sat in front of, at that time we didn't have AI. So she was only like she was 4.5 when she asked me that question. 4.5, right? And I was 44 years old. And I said, I actually don't know. I said, I don't know. So we went and looked at it, and we read it up at Google, and we actually learned together. So it's okay for you to acknowledge you do not know something. So a question is not a form of disrespect. It is actually a form of curiosity. Likewise, when parents have this thing that when we pick up our children from school, the first thing we do is, how was school?
Yeah.
Standard answer, right? But that's not the question they want to hear. Is my first thing. I realize they sometimes had a bad day and they don't want to talk about it. So my first question to my daughter is, what would you like to get? Would you like to get something to eat? Shall we stop somewhere, or would you like to just go straight back? Right? And then if she wants to talk about it, obviously, Dad, today was such a bummer. I just hated school. They would tell you if they want to, but a question. So they didn't see the question as this. But I was asking the question, what do we do next? Yeah. And if the natural Asian parent is, the school is bad. No, 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 you must study very hard, because you have to get a good job. And so you're just adding more. That's where you disrespect them.
Yeah. No, what a fabulous.
Questions are curiosity.
Yeah, no, I really, really like. It's a great way to kind of close out our conversation. Is that do not do not misjudge the question. The question should not be disrespected. I think welcome the question, and I think you gave such good examples from your daughter. And I think we've all been in that situation where that once upon a time we just had to accept it. But I think the young generation, the new generation, does question, and I think that there's a good for all of us in that we learn, they learn. Um, Vijay, you do some great work. Just as a way to close out, where can people find you? Are there sites, places that people can look you up? You've written books, obviously, also. So, if you
Yeah.
want to share any credentials or social handles,
Well,
do so.
they can look at my website, www.orbis, which is actually an acronym called Own Your Life, Be Your Zing. Zing coming from the word Hotel Transylvania, which is to love, which is fall in love with yourself first.com. Where I have some of the things that I do in terms of developing Gen Zs. I do have a cognitive and critical rapping platform where we help organizations train their managers to have situational rapping so that they are building their succession readiness and measure that change in thinking to take charge of AI, but how that also reflects back on the financial metrics, and that's called PACE, pace.allbits.com. I'm always on LinkedIn. That's where you can find me 24/7 because I'm constantly writing. My books are available on Amazon. There's a few of them. There's Living and Surviving the Disruption of AI, which is a core authoring initiative. Clarity Demands Collateral, which talks both about vertical growth, but how do you grow horizontally? That is a thing that most people don't think very much about or have their own misconceptions. And I also wrote the opening chapter of this book called Life IPO on the Algorithmic Workplace. So, I think a Google search or a ChatGPT search these days well, just look up Veejay Madhavan. I'm sure they would have, you have something to commend you to take from. And if it's up your alley, yes, they can all reach me through LinkedIn. That is where I live these days, because it allows me to interact with my peers, but also continuously be that evangelist where I offer possibilities to leaders and to Gen Zs and to managers alike on how they can navigate some of the very interesting challenges we encounter in the workplace.
Yeah, fantastic. No, lovely. Thank you, Vijay. I think there you have it. You had all the places where people can look you up. LinkedIn is the easiest, perhaps, but the website's there and the other places and all the work that you do with Gen Zs and the managers who manage Gen Zs. I think there's a plethora of experience that you've shared and that you bring, and of course the books are there as well. So thank you once again, Vijay. It's a really, really pleasure, and I do hope our travels can allow us the opportunity to meet us in person at some point. And I wish you a great rest of the week. Take care.
Nikhil, delighted to be here. Thank you for the opportunity. Much appreciated.